Ilara felt the cold seep through the ill-fitting wool of her dress, a familiar and unwelcome companion in the drafty halls of her father's manor. It was a damp, clinging chill that had little to do with the autumn air and everything to do with the frost that had permanently settled over their lives. Outside, the fields lay fallow, the crops blackened and withered by a blight that had crept in from the shadowed woods months ago. Inside, the chill was one of despair. It radiated from her father's stony silence and the fearful whispers of the few remaining servants. She traced the rim of a cracked wooden bowl, her own reflection staring back from the murky water within, a pale, thin face framed by hair the color of straw and eyes the gray of a winter sky. It was a plain face, unremarkable in every way, save for the faint silvery birthmark that curled like a wisp of smoke from her temple to her cheekbone. The village crone said it was a witch's mark. Her father, Lord Arden, simply called it another imperfection in a long list. Her greatest flaw, however, was not one that could be seen. At 20 years of age, she remained unmarried and, as the village midwife had grimly pronounced after a humiliating examination, irrevocably barren. A daughter who could not forge an alliance through marriage, who could not produce an heir, was a daughter of no value. She was a failed investment. Her father never missed an opportunity to remind her of this fact. She was a ghost in her own home, drifting through rooms that held no warmth for her. Her only solace was the small, neglected library, a dusty chamber filled with her mother's forgotten books. She would spend hours there, losing herself in tales of ancient kingdoms and forgotten magic, her fingers tracing words that were more real to her than the disapproving glares she faced beyond the library door. Her love for books was yet another mark against her. A woman's hands were for weaving and embroidery, not for turning pages. "Still hiding in here with your useless fantasies?" Lord Arden's voice was a harsh rasp that shattered the quiet. He stood in the doorway, a stout, florid man whose fine clothes could not hide the sour scent of fear and cheap wine that clung to him. Ilara flinched, closing the leather-bound tome gently. "Father, You were just wasting time, as always." He cut her off, his eyes sweeping the room with disgust. "The granaries are nearly empty. The people are starving. And you sit here, reading tales of dragons and kings who do not exist." She felt the familiar shame rise, hot and prickling, in her cheeks. The stories offer comfort. "Comfort does not fill bellies," he sneered. "Your mother filled your head with this nonsense. Look where it got her. In the cold ground. And look what it has made you. A barren spinster with a head full of ink and dust, utterly worthless." Each word was a carefully aimed stone, and she had long ago run out of shields. She lowered her gaze to the floorboards, her silence the only defense she had left. He saw it as acquiescence, as proof of her meek and useless nature. He could not see the quiet resilience hardening within her, a core of steel forged in the constant fire of his contempt. She was worthless to him. The thought was no longer a wound, but a simple, cold fact. The meeting with the village elders was held in the great hall, the hearth spitting and hissing as if in protest against the grim pronouncements being made. The air was thick with the smell of wet wool and desperation. Ilara was not meant to be there, but she lingered in the shadows of the upper gallery, listening. "The blight is unnatural," croaked old Thomas, the village's self-proclaimed expert on all things superstitious. "It is a curse from the onyx spire. The old pact has been broken." A murmur of fear rippled through the assembled men. The onyx spire. Even the name was a black icicle on the tongue. It was the jagged peak that dominated the northern horizon, a fortress of volcanic rock that was said to be the home of the vampire king. A creature of legend, a nightmare whispered to frighten children. But in these desperate times, legend felt terrifyingly real. The pact required a tribute, another elder said, his voice trembling. Once every century, when our need was greatest, a life was to be offered at the foot of the spire. A life for the land's life. Her father stood before them, his face a mask of grim authority. The last tribute was over 100 years ago. Our ancestors prospered for it. We have grown complacent. We have forgotten our duties. Ilara's blood ran cold. A life. They were talking about a human sacrifice. They were talking about sending one of their own to the monster in the mountains. Who would we send? Someone asked, the question hanging heavy and fearful in the air. Who among us deserves such a fate? And then she saw it. The slow, calculating way her father's eyes scanned the room, the flicker of an idea, ugly and pragmatic, taking root in his mind. His gaze lifted, almost as if he could feel her presence in the shadows above. He did not see her, but she knew, with a certainty that stole the breath from her lungs, what he was thinking. A failed investment, a barren daughter, a worthless asset that could finally be put to use. The next morning, he summoned her to his study. The room was cold, the fire unlit. He did not ask her to sit. He stood by the window, looking out at the dying lands he ruled. A decision has been made, he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. A tribute is required to appease the ancient power of the spire and lift this curse from our lands. Ilara stood perfectly still, her hands clasped tightly behind her back to stop them from shaking. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. A life for a life. He turned, and his eyes were like chips of granite. Precisely. The village requires a sacrifice. I, as their lord, must provide it. And you have chosen me, she said. It was not a question, a flicker of something. Was it surprise at her directness? Crossed his face before it was gone. It is the most practical solution. Your life here is, without prospect. You cannot marry. You cannot provide an heir. In this, your life can finally have purpose. You will be a savior to your people. A savior. He dressed the ugly word disposal in the noble robes of sacrifice. The dark humor of it was a bitter taste in her mouth. She, who had been scorned and devalued her entire life, was now to be the cornerstone of their salvation. I see, she said, her voice a low, steady whisper. You will be taken to the edge of the Blackwood at dusk, he continued, turning back to the window as if the matter was concluded. From there, you must walk the path to the spire alone. It is the old way. She did not weep. She did not beg. The part of her that might have pleaded for a father's love had withered and died long ago, just like the crops in his fields. She simply gave a slight, formal nod. As you command, my lord. The use of his title rather than father was a small, sharp act of defiance. It was the severing of a tie that had only ever been a chain. He did not seem to notice, or perhaps he did not care. He had made his transaction. The worthless daughter was finally sold for a price he found acceptable, the hope of his own survival. The journey to the edge of the Blackwood was silent and swift. 2 of her father's guards escorted her, their faces grim, their hands never straying far from the hilts of their swords. They smelled of fear. They were more afraid of the woods than she was of the monster who supposedly lived within them. They stopped where the tended fields gave way to a wall of ancient, gnarled trees. The path was barely visible, a dark slash leading into the oppressive gloom. The air grew instantly colder, carrying the scent of damp earth and decay. Her father was there, mounted on his war horse, a looming silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. He did not dismount. "This is where we leave you," he said. His voice was flat, carrying no hint of remorse or sorrow. It was the voice of a merchant concluding a deal. She looked at him one last time, at the man who had given her life only to discard it so easily. There was nothing left to say. She had been an object to him, a piece on a board, and he had just made his final, strategic move. She turned her back on him, on the guards, on the dying fields and the life of quiet misery she had always known. She did not look back. With a steady resolve that surprised even herself, she took the first step onto the path and walked into the waiting darkness of the Blackwood. The forest seemed to swallow her whole, the sounds of the world behind her fading until all that remained was the crunch of her own footsteps on the fallen leaves and the heavy, watchful silence of the ancient trees. The path was longer and more arduous than she had imagined. Twisted roots snaked across the ground, threatening to trip her in the deepening gloom, and the branches of the skeletal trees seemed to claw at her thin cloak. The forest was unnervingly silent. No birds sang, no insects chirped. There was only the sound of her own breathing and the frantic, fearful thumping of her own heart. She had expected to be terrified, and she was, but beneath the fear was a strange sense of liberation. Every step she took was her own. She was no longer waiting in a dusty library for her life to be decided by others. She was walking toward her fate, whatever it might be. After what felt like hours, the oppressive canopy of the forest began to thin. The air grew sharper, colder, and carried the clean, hard scent of stone and ice. She emerged from the tree line onto a rocky plateau, and there it was, the onyx spire. It was nothing like the crude drawings in the old village maps. It was a masterpiece of impossible architecture, a single, slender tower of polished black stone that seemed to have been carved from the mountain itself. It pierced the star-dusted sky like a shard of obsidian, elegant and menacing. Windows like slivers of silver glittered in the moonlight, and delicate web-like buttresses clung to its sides. It was not the crude lair of a beast. It was a palace. A pair of immense doors, wrought from a dark, unidentifiable metal and carved with intricate, swirling patterns, stood at the base of the tower. They were closed, presenting an impassable barrier. There was no bell, no knocker. She stood before them, a small, insignificant figure in the face of such grandeur, and waited. Had she come all this way only to freeze to death on the doorstep? As if in answer to her unspoken thought, one of the massive doors swung inward, moving with an eerie, weightless silence. An invitation. A summons. The hall beyond was not dark, but lit by the soft, flickering glow of hundreds of candles, their light reflecting off polished marble floors and dark, richly carved wooden paneling. She hesitated for only a moment, then stepped across the threshold. The door swung shut behind her with the same unnerving silence, the sound of its closing a soft, final thud that echoed in the vast space. The air inside was warm and dry, scented with beeswax, old paper, and something else. Something faintly metallic and spicy, like old wine and dried roses. It was a place of breathtaking, ancient beauty. Tapestries depicting epic, unfamiliar histories hung from the walls, their colors still vibrant despite their obvious age. Archways soared into the vaulted darkness above, and a grand staircase of black marble curved upwards into the shadows. This was no monster's den. This was the home of a king. Her expectation of dungeons and gore, of filth and bones, was so laughably wrong that a small, hysterical bubble of a laugh threatened to escape her. "You are not what I expected." The voice came from the shadows at the top of the grand staircase. It was a low, cultured baritone, smooth as velvet but with an edge of cold steel. It held an ancient power that resonated in the very stones around her. She looked up, her heart leaping into her throat. A figure began to descend the stairs, moving with a fluid, predatory grace that was utterly silent. He was tall and slender, dressed in exquisitely tailored clothes of black silk and velvet that seemed to drink the candlelight. His hair was the color of polished jet, falling straight to his shoulders, and his face was a paradox of terrifying beauty. It was all sharp, aristocratic angles and pale, flawless skin that looked as if it had never seen the sun. His eyes, as he drew closer, were the color of molten silver, luminous and intelligent. They held a profound, soul-deep weariness, but also a sharp, unnerving perception. He was ageless, ancient, and more beautiful than any man she had ever seen. He was also, without a doubt, the most dangerous thing she had ever encountered. This was the Vampire King, Lord Valerius. He stopped a few paces from her, his silver eyes sweeping over her from head to toe. It was not a lecherous gaze, but a cool, analytical assessment. He took in her frayed wool dress, her thin frame, the smudge of dirt on her cheek, and the defiant tilt of her chin. "Your people sent me a scarecrow," he observed, his voice laced with a faint, dry amusement. "I was led to believe the tributes were, at the very least, well-fed." Ilara stiffened. After everything she had endured, she would not be mocked. "Forgive me, my lord. Had I known I was to be judged on my plumpness, I would have eaten my father's prize sow before I left." The words were out before she could stop them, sharp and sarcastic. She instantly braced for his wrath, for the flash of fangs and the end she had been promised. Instead, a slow, genuine smile touched his lips. It transformed his severe beauty into something devastating. It did not reach his weary eyes, but the amusement was real. A scarecrow with a viper's tongue. How unexpected. They usually weep. He circled her slowly like a wolf inspecting a new and curious addition to its territory. "You are trembling, but not just from fear. You are cold. Your lord sent you into my domain half frozen and half starved, a poor offering indeed." Before she could react, he unclasped the heavy, fur-lined cloak from his own shoulders. It was made of deep black velvet, impossibly soft, and radiating a faint, unnatural warmth. He draped it around her. The weight of it was immense, a comforting, secure pressure, and the scent that clung to the fabric, that same scent of old books, wine, and roses, enveloped her. It was the first truly kind and considerate gesture she had received in years. It was so unexpected, so contrary to the monstrous image she had been fed, that it left her speechless. She could only stare at him, her gray eyes wide with confusion. He gestured toward a massive hearth at the far end of the hall, where a fire roared with impossible blue-tinged flames. "Come, no bargain can be struck with a guest who is about to collapse from the cold. We will talk. Guest, bargain, not victim, not sacrifice." The words echoed in her mind, a discordant but hopeful melody. She clutched the warm velvet of his cloak around her and followed him toward the fire, her fear slowly being replaced by a deep and perilous curiosity. The monster was not a monster at all. He was something far more complex and infinitely more dangerous. He led her to a pair of high-backed chairs upholstered in dark red leather, positioned before the mesmerizing fire. He moved with an effortless elegance, a creature completely at home in his opulent solitude. He did not sit, but stood by the mantel, one hand resting on the carved stone, his silver eyes studying her as she sank gratefully into the soft leather. The warmth from the fire and the heavy cloak began to chase the deep-seated chill from her bones. "The pact your ancestors made with me was a simple one," he began, his voice a calm, melodic rumble. "In times of great famine or plague, they would send one of their own to the spire. Not as a blood sacrifice, as your primitive superstitions likely imagine. My needs are more refined than that. Ilara watched him, her apprehension warring with her fascination. Then what do you want from me? Companionship, he said, the word sounding strange and stark in the vast hall. I exist outside of time. I watch the centuries turn, the forests grow and die and grow again. The world of mortals changes in the blink of an eye for me. The stories, the politics, the petty triumphs and tragedies, they are a fleeting diversion. The tribute is not for my sustenance, but for my curiosity. A window into the world I can no longer walk in freely. He paused, his gaze fixed on the dancing blue flames. Immortality is a profoundly lonely affair. I require a companion to speak with, to share knowledge, to simply be. In return for this service, I lend my power to the land, ensuring it thrives. It was a confession of loneliness so vast and ancient it was difficult for her to comprehend. He was not a mindless beast. He was an eternal prisoner in his own magnificent castle. So you do not intend to kill me? She asked, the question sounding foolishly blunt. His lips curved into that slight, humorless smile again. To what end? A screaming meal lasts but a moment. A good conversation can last for hours. It is a far more valuable commodity. He gestured to a small table beside her chair, upon which a silver goblet and a plate of bread and cheese had appeared as if from nowhere. Eat. You are no use to me if you faint from hunger. She eyed the food with suspicion. Is it safe? The food is perfectly ordinary, I assure you, he said, a note of impatience in his tone. The wine, however, is not for you. It is for me. And you are, at present, far too scrawny to be of any interest in that regard. The dry, almost clinical dismissal of her as a potential meal was so bizarrely reassuring that she found herself reaching for the bread. It was fresh, the cheese was sharp and nutty, and it was the best thing she had tasted in months. She ate slowly, deliberately, feeling his silver eyes on her the entire time. Now, he said, turning his full attention to her once more, let us establish the terms of our bargain. You will remain here, in my castle, as my guest. You will want for nothing. Food, clothing, warmth. All will be provided. In return, each evening you will dine with me. You will tell me of your world. You will read to me from your books. You will share the knowledge your people seem so eager to discard. Her head snapped up. How did you know about my books? I know many things, he said simply. I know your name is Ilara. I know your father is Lord Arden, a man who would trade his own blood to save his dying lands. And I know that you find more solace in the written word than in the company of your fellow humans. An admirable trait, in my opinion. It was the first time anyone had ever called her love of reading admirable. Her father had called it a waste. The village women had called it unnatural. But this ancient, dangerous creature saw it as a virtue. A warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. It was the unfamiliar feeling of being seen, of being valued. And my village? She asked, her voice quiet. The blight? So long as you uphold your end of the bargain, I will uphold mine, he promised. The blight will recede. The rains will come. Their harvest will be bountiful. Your father will have what he desires. The choice was no choice at all. A life of comfort and conversation in a magnificent castle, or a return to a world of scorn and worthlessness. She would be a prisoner, yes, a songbird in a gilded cage, but had she not been a prisoner already, in a cage made of duty and disdain? I agree to your terms, she said, her voice clear and steady. Good. Valerius said, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. He seemed about to say more when a new figure appeared from the shadows. It was a woman, old but with a straight back and dignified air, dressed in the simple gray garb of a servant. Her face was lined with wrinkles, but her eyes were sharp and kind. Lyra will show you to your chambers, Valerius stated. She manages my household. You will find her more accommodating than I. The woman, Lyra, gave a small, respectful curtsy. This way, my lady. My lady. The title was so foreign, so utterly absurd when applied to her, that Alara almost corrected her. But she held her tongue, gave Valerius a hesitant nod, and followed the old woman up the grand staircase. The castle was a labyrinth of silent, candlelit corridors. It was vast and empty, the silence broken only by the soft rustle of Lyra's dress and the echo of their footsteps. The chambers she was led to were larger than the entire ground floor of her father's manor. A four-poster bed draped in deep blue velvet dominated the room, and a fire, identical to the one in the hall, crackled merrily in a marble fireplace. A wardrobe stood open, revealing a collection of gowns made from fabrics she had only ever read about. Silk, satin, and velvet in rich, deep colors. The master had these prepared for you, Lyra said, her voice soft. He anticipated your arrival. He knew I was coming? Alara asked, running a hand over the sleeve of a dark green silk gown. It was softer than anything she had ever touched. The master knows what the land knows, Lyra answered cryptically. He felt its desperation. And he felt a potential? He said your village was offering up a jewel they believed to be common stone. She looked at Alara, her gaze direct and surprisingly warm. He is not the monster the stories claim. He is lonely. Be kind to him, my lady. He has not had kindness in a very long time. With another curtsy, the old servant departed, leaving Alara alone in the opulent room, a jewel they believed to be common stone. The words resonated deep within her. She looked at her reflection in a tall, silver-framed mirror. The girl staring back was still the same pale, thin scarecrow. But she was wearing the king's cloak. And for the first time in her life, she felt the faint, unfamiliar glimmer of her own worth. The days that followed settled into a strange and peaceful routine. Alara spent her mornings and afternoons exploring the castle. Its silence was not empty, but full of history. She discovered a music room with a grand piano whose keys played by themselves, filling the halls with hauntingly beautiful melodies. She found a conservatory filled with impossible, night-blooming flowers that glowed with a soft, silver light. But her favorite place, the heart of the castle and her own personal sanctuary, was the library. It was a cathedral of books, 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling shelves, connected by spiraling iron staircases, held more volumes than she could read in 1,000 lifetimes. The air smelled of aged paper, leather, and dust. Here, she was not an outcast or a sacrifice. She was a scholar. She was home. Each evening, as promised, she would dine with Valerius in a smaller, more intimate dining chamber. The meals were always exquisite, though he himself never ate. He would sit opposite her, a single goblet of his dark crimson wine in his hand, and he would listen. At first, their conversations were formal. She told him of the changing seasons in the world outside, of the petty squabbles between lords, of the simple lives of the villagers. He listened with an unnerving intensity, asking sharp, perceptive questions that cut to the heart of the matter. He seemed to drink in the information. A starving man finally granted a feast. Gradually, she began to read to him from the books she found in his library. She read ancient poetry in forgotten tongues, historical accounts of empires he had seen rise and fall, and fantastical stories that he would often critique with the first-hand knowledge of someone who had actually met a dragon or two. "That author has clearly never smelled a dragon's breath," he commented one evening, swirling the wine in his goblet. "He describes it as sulfuric. It is, in fact, more akin to superheated cinnamon and regret." Ilara found herself laughing, a real, genuine laugh. The sound was so unfamiliar in her own ears that it startled her into silence. Valerius watched her, a curious softness in his silver eyes. "It is a pleasant sound. You should use it more often." His praise, always so unexpected and direct, sent a flush of warmth through her. She felt herself opening up to him in ways she never had with anyone. She told him of her mother, who had loved books and flowers, and who had died when Ilara was just a child. She told him of her father's cold pragmatism, of the whispers and stares of the villagers, of the crushing weight of being deemed worthless. He never offered pity. Instead, he offered a perspective forged over millennia. "Mortals are obsessed with utility," he said, his voice a low murmur. "A thing must have a purpose. A daughter for breeding, a son for fighting, a field for planting. They are so busy judging a flower for its ability to feed them that they forget to admire its beauty. Your father is a fool, Ilara. He had a rare orchid in his garden and complained that it bore no fruit. He called her Ilara, not scarecrow, not guest, but her name. And in his voice, it sounded like a precious thing." One evening, as she was recounting a passage from a book on ancient bloodlines, he leaned forward, his intensity suddenly sharp and focused. "That mark on your face," he said, his silver eyes fixed on the silvery wisp on her temple. "What have you been told of it?" "That it is a witch's mark," she answered, the old shame making her want to hide her face. "A sign of a curse." "It is not a curse," he said, his voice low and certain. "It is a sign of the old blood. The blood of the seers and the whispersmiths. It has grown faint in the human world, diluted over generations, but it is there, in you." He rose from his chair and came to stand behind her, his presence a palpable force of cold power and ancient energy. She felt a shiver trace its way down her spine, but it was not entirely from fear. "Your barrenness," he continued, his voice now a soft whisper near her ear. "It is not a failing of your body. It is a sign of your strength. The magic in your blood is potent. It claims all of your body's energy for itself, leaving none for the mundane task of childbearing. It is a power that has been lying dormant, waiting." She could feel the cool aura that emanated from him, could almost feel his gaze on her skin. "Power? I have no power." "You do," he insisted. "You simply have not been taught how to listen to it. Have you never felt a premonition, a sudden knowing of a thing you should not know? Have you never calmed an agitated animal with a touch, or found a lost object as if it called to you?" She thought back. There had been small, inexplicable things throughout her life, a sudden certainty that a storm was coming when the sky was clear. The way her father's hounds, vicious to everyone else, would grow calm and docile in her presence. She had dismissed them as coincidences, as foolish fancies. "Your mind," he said, his voice resonating with a strange pride. "Your affinity for knowledge, for stories, for the past. That is the magic seeking its own kind. It is drawn to history, to lore, because that is where its own story is written." He reached out, and with an impossibly gentle touch, his cool fingers traced the outline of the birthmark on her temple. A jolt, like lightning and ice, shot through her. The room seemed to shimmer at the edges, and for a fleeting second, she saw not the dining chamber, but a windswept cliff under a sky with two moons. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving her breathless. "Did you see it?" he asked, his voice tight with a strange excitement. She could only nod, her heart hammering against her ribs. "This is your gift, Ilara," he said, his hand falling away. "The gift your people scorned. And it is why I was drawn to you. When the call for a tribute came, I felt the faint echo of your magic on the wind. It was a whisper of a song I had not heard in centuries." He was not just a lonely king seeking a companion. He had recognized something within her that no one else had, not even herself. He saw not a flaw, but a latent power. He saw not a worthless outcast, but a dormant queen. The realization was a terrifying, exhilarating thing. She was more than she had ever known, and her life in this castle was not an imprisonment, but an awakening. Their connection deepened in the weeks that followed. Valerius began to actively teach her, guiding her in small ways to recognize and embrace the nascent magic within her. He would have her close her eyes and listen, truly listen, to the castle, to feel the hum of ancient stone and the flow of power that ran through it like a current. He taught her how to scry using a bowl of water and moonlight, and while her visions were fleeting and chaotic, a glimpse of a running wolf, the face of a laughing child, the shadow of a burning city, they were real. Her newfound abilities were intoxicating, but it was the quiet moments of intellectual and emotional intimacy that truly bound her to him. They would spend entire nights in the library, debating the philosophies of long-dead civilizations or tracing the lineage of forgotten gods. She learned that his cold demeanor was a shield, a carefully constructed fortress built to protect a heart that had been wounded by millennia of loss and betrayal. He had loved and lost more times than she could comprehend, watching entire generations of friends and lovers wither and die while he remained unchanged. She, in turn, found her voice. The shy, silenced girl who had arrived at the spire was fading, replaced by a confident woman who was unafraid to challenge his assertions or counter his arguments with her own sharp wit. He seemed to delight in her defiance, in the fire he had so carefully fanned. One night, as a storm raged outside, rattling the thick glass of the library windows, she found him staring into the fire, a profound sadness in his silver eyes. "What is it?" she asked softly, coming to stand beside him. He did not look at her, his gaze remaining on the flames. "I am thinking of a time before the spire was my prison. A time when I could walk in the sun, when the world was younger, and magic was not a thing to be hidden." It was the most vulnerable she had ever seen him. "What happened?" "A war," he said, his voice flat and heavy with memory. "A war between my kind and the fledgling race of men who feared what they could not understand. I was a king. A general. I fought to protect my people. But we lost. The victors cursed me. They bound me to this mountain, to the shadows. I can command the stones and the winds within my domain, but I cannot step beyond it. I can live forever, but I am forever a prisoner." He finally turned to look at her, and the loneliness in his eyes was a vast, bottomless ocean. "You, Ilara, are the first new thing to enter these walls in a century, the first voice that is not an echo of my own thoughts. You are like a single, vibrant bird that has flown into a tomb." Her heart ached for him. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand on his arm. His skin was cool, like marble, but he did not pull away. Instead, he covered her hand with his own. His touch was firm, possessive, yet gentle. The contact sent a now familiar jolt of energy through her, a current of shared life and power. "You are not in a tomb," she said, her voice fierce with a conviction that surprised her. "You are in a library. And a library is a place of life, of endless stories. A real, true smile touched his lips, and this time it reached his eyes, crinkling the corners and filling them with a light that chased away some of the ancient shadows. A clever distinction. I knew you were no ordinary scarecrow. It was in that moment, with the storm raging outside and the firelight dancing on his beautiful, tragic face, that Alara realized the terrifying truth. Her curiosity had blossomed into affection. Her affection had deepened into something far more powerful, something that felt dangerously like love. She was falling in love with the vampire king, her captor, her tutor, her lonely, immortal companion. The thought should have filled her with fear. Instead, it filled her with a sense of profound and absolute rightness. This fragile peace, this growing intimacy, was not destined to last. The outside world, which she had almost forgotten, came crashing back with brutal force. It arrived in the form of a small, armed delegation that appeared at the edge of the Blackwood one crisp autumn morning. Valerius felt their approach first. He was standing with Alara on a high balcony overlooking the forest when he stiffened, his head tilting as if listening to a distant sound. "We have visitors," he said, his voice losing all its warmth and turning to ice. "Uninvited ones." Alara followed his gaze. A group of men on horseback were gathered at the tree line, their banners limp in the still air. She recognized the boar sigil of her father's house, and beside it, another banner, one she had only seen in woodcuts, the stark, unforgiving symbol of the High Inquisitor, a silver sword through a black sun. A cold dread, a feeling she had not experienced since her arrival, washed over her. "My father." "And a holy man," Valerius added, his lip curling in a slight sneer. "He has brought dogs to hunt a supposed witch. It seems your father was not content to simply be rid of you. Now he seeks to profit from your condemnation." The confrontation took place in the Great Hall, the same hall where she had first met him. Valerius sat upon a throne-like chair of carved obsidian on a raised dais, looking every inch the ancient, formidable king he was. Alara stood beside him, not behind, a deliberate placement that spoke of partnership, not ownership. She wore a gown of dark blue velvet, a stark contrast to the rags she had arrived in, and her head was held high. Her father, Lord Arden, and a severe-looking man in the black robes of an inquisitor were escorted into the hall by two of Valerius's silent, shadowy guards. Her father's face was a mixture of greed, fear, and righteous anger. The inquisitor's face was a mask of cold zealotry, his eyes scanning the opulent hall with undisguised revulsion. "Daughter!" Lord Arden boomed, his voice echoing unnaturally in the vast space. "You are alive." "As you can see," Alara replied, her voice cool and even. "A fact which seems to displease you." "Displease me?" "I am overjoyed," he blustered, though his eyes darted nervously toward Valerius. "We heard tales you had survived, that you lived in sin with this creature. We have come to rescue you from his vile clutches." The Inquisitor, a man named Malachi, stepped forward. "Alara of House Arden, you stand accused of heresy and consorting with a creature of darkness. Your father has petitioned for your soul's salvation. Renounce this demon and return with us for purification, and the Mother Church may yet show you mercy." Purification. She knew what that meant. A pyre. They were not here to save her. They were here to reclaim an asset and use her as a spectacle to solidify their own power. All eyes were on her. Her father, his face pleading and demanding. The Inquisitor, his eyes burning with cold fire. And Valerius, who remained silent, his expression unreadable. He was giving her the stage. This was her choice to make, her battle to fight. The realization filled her not with fear, but with a surge of strength. "There will be no need for purification, Inquisitor," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound authority. "For I have committed no sin, and I will certainly not be returning with you." Lord Arden's face purpled with rage. "You will do as I command. I am your father." "You ceased to be my father the moment you sold me to settle a debt," Ilara retorted, taking a step forward. Her voice was sharp, each word a carefully aimed dart. "You cast me out, deemed me worthless, and sent me to what you believed was my death. You did not do it for your people. You did it for yourself, to rid yourself of a daughter who was an embarrassment to you. But your gambit failed. The monster you sent me to was more of a man than you have ever been. The cage you sent me to has proven to be a sanctuary." She turned her gaze to the Inquisitor, whose face had hardened into a mask of fury. "And you, holy man. You speak of darkness, yet you stand in a hall filled with more knowledge and beauty than your entire church possesses. You offer me the mercy of the flame. Lord Valerius offered me kindness. You call him a demon, but he has treated me with honor. You call yourselves men of God, but you act with the greed and cruelty of devils. I choose to remain here." Her defiance, so public and so absolute, hung in the air, stunning the two men into silence. She had used their own weapons, logic, rhetoric, and moral accusation against them. She felt a faint hum under her skin, the thrum of her own power rising to her defense, buoyed by her conviction. It was then that Valerius finally moved. He rose from his throne, not with speed, but with a slow, deliberate grace that was more terrifying than any sudden movement. He descended the dais and came to stand beside Ilara, placing a proprietary hand on the small of her back. The gesture was a clear and unambiguous statement. "She is with me." "You have your answer," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. The temperature in the hall dropped by several degrees. The candle flames flickered and dimmed. "She has made her choice. Now you will leave my lands and never return. Should you, or any of your kind, set foot past the Blackwood again, I will unleash a blight upon your world that will make your current troubles seem like a summer festival. I will turn your fields to dust and your rivers to blood. Is that understood?" The sheer, overwhelming power that radiated from him was a physical force. Lord Arden stumbled back, his face ashen with terror. The Inquisitor, though visibly shaken, held his ground out of pure, stubborn zeal. "You cannot threaten us, demon. The power of the righteous will see you destroyed." Valerius smiled, a chilling, predatory baring of teeth that held no humor. "Your righteous have tried for 1,000 years, and for 1,000 years I have decorated my halls with their bones. Now get out." He made a small, dismissive gesture, and a wind, cold and smelling of the grave, swept through the hall, extinguishing half the candles and sending the heavy tapestries billowing. It slammed the great doors open and physically shoved Lord Arden and Inquisitor Malachi backward, out of the hall, and onto the cold stone steps. The doors boomed shut, plunging the hall into a sudden deep twilight. Ilara stood, her heart pounding, not with fear, but with a wild, triumphant exhilaration. She had faced her past. She had faced her oppressors. And she had won. She had chosen her own fate. She turned to Valerius, ready to thank him, but the look on his face stopped her. The mask of the powerful king had fallen away, and in its place was a raw, aching vulnerability she had never seen before. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation left the great hall in a profound silence, broken only by the crackling of the hearth. The adrenaline that had surged through Ilara began to recede, leaving her feeling strangely hollowed out, yet solid in her own skin. She had spoken words she never thought she would have the courage to utter. Valerius stood by the great doors, his back to her, one hand pressed against the cold, dark metal as if to feel the fading presence of the intruders. The immense power he had just wielded seemed to drain away, leaving him looking almost fragile in the dim light. "You were magnificent," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its earlier menace. He did not turn to face her. "You use their own hypocrisy as a weapon against them. I have seen seasoned diplomats with less skill." "You taught me," she replied, her voice equally soft. "You showed me that my mind was not a liability." He finally turned, and the look in his silver eyes was one she had never seen before. It was a maelstrom of ancient pain, fear, and a desperate burgeoning hope. "And in doing so, I have tied you to my fate. You defied them for me. You chose this prison. Do you understand what you have done, Alara?" "I chose a life of worth," she said, stepping toward him. "I chose a life with you." "A life," he repeated, the words laced with a profound bitterness. "You speak of a life. I can offer you an existence, an eternity of these same halls, these same books, this same twilight. What you did today, it was brave, but it has sealed your doom as surely as it has sealed mine." He began to pace before the hearth, his graceful movements now agitated, restless. "For centuries, I have been alone. I convinced myself it was a necessity, a preference even. I watched the world through the window of my tributes, a detached observer. But you did not just bring stories. You brought life back into these stones. You woke me from a slumber I did not even realize I was in." He stopped and faced her, his expression raw with a vulnerability that was more intimidating than any show of power. "When that zealot threatened you with his purification, I felt something I have not felt in 500 years. Rage, a true, burning rage. And beneath it, fear. Fear of losing you. Fear of being alone again in the silence you have filled." This was his deepest secret. Not his curse, not his power, but his profound, soul-crushing loneliness. The burden he carried was not just his immortality, but the love he was no longer capable of, the connections he was too afraid to forge, only to watch them turn to dust. "You are mortal, Alara," he said, his voice cracking with an emotion she could not name. "You will age. You will wither. You will die. And I will be left here with your ghost, another memory to haunt these halls for another 1,000 years. The joy you have brought me will become the most exquisite torture I have ever known. I cannot bear it." Tears welled in her eyes, tears not of sadness for herself, but of a deep, aching empathy for him, for the magnificent, powerful, and utterly broken creature standing before her. She went to him, unafraid, and placed her hands on his chest. Through the fine silk of his shirt she could feel the stillness within, the absence of a heartbeat. "Then let me stay," she whispered, "however long I have." He looked down at her, his silver eyes shimmering with unshed tears of blood. "A handful of decades? It is both an eternity and no time at all. It is not enough." He took her face in his cool hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. "There is a way for you to stay. Not as a fleeting mortal companion, but as my equal. A permanent solution." Her breath caught in her throat. She knew what he was suggesting. Immortality. He nodded, his gaze intense, searching hers. "It is not a gift I can give, but a choice you must make. It is a ritual, an ancient binding of blood and magic. It would share my nature with you, but it would also awaken the full potential of your own power. The old blood within you would roar to life. You would not become a mere creature of the night, a lesser reflection of me. You would become something new, something more. You would be my queen, bound to me not by a curse but by a willing choice. He was not offering to turn her into a monster. He was offering her a crown. He was offering her a partnership, a true and eternal union of equals. But the cost was immense. She would have to leave behind her mortal life, everything she had ever been, forever. It must be your choice, and yours alone, he stressed, his voice tight with desperation. There can be no coercion, no fear. The magic requires a willing heart, a soul that steps into the darkness with its eyes wide open. If there is any doubt, any hesitation, the ritual will fail. It could destroy us both. He was laying his heart, his hope, and both their futures at her feet. He was giving her all the power to accept him or to reject him and condemn him back to his eternal solitude. She thought of the life she had left behind, a cold hearth, a father's scorn, a future as a withered spinster pitied and whispered about, a life of being unseen, unheard, unloved. She looked at the life she had now, a home filled with knowledge and beauty, a companion who saw her, valued her, and challenged her, a man who, in his own tormented way, loved her. The choice was not between life and a half-life. It was between a life of worthlessness and a life of purpose. It was not a sacrifice. It was a coronation. She looked up into his tormented silver eyes and saw her own future reflected there. She saw centuries of shared knowledge, of whispered conversations in the dead of night, of standing together against a world that would fear them. She saw a partner, an equal, a king who needed his queen. Yes, she said, her voice clear and unwavering, resonating with the absolute certainty of her own heart. I choose you, Valerius. I choose this life. I choose to be your queen. A single perfect tear of blood traced a path down his pale cheek. It was a tear of relief, of disbelief, of a joy so profound it was painful. He lowered his head and pressed his forehead against hers, his cool skin a stark contrast to the heat of her own. Then it is time, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. It is time for my queen to be crowned. The ritual was not performed in a dungeon or on a bloody altar, but in the heart of the castle's ancient conservatory. The glass dome above them revealed a sky thick with stars, and the air was heavy with the scent of the glowing, night-blooming flora. It was a place of life, not death. Valerius led her to the center of the room, where a shallow basin of polished obsidian was filled with water that perfectly reflected the cosmos above. He was dressed in simple black silks, she in a gown of silver that shimmered like moonlight on water. There were no arcane symbols, no chanting, only a profound and reverent silence. He took her hands in his. This will not be painless, he warned softly. Two magics, two natures, will be at war within you before they find balance. But I will be with you. I will not let you fall. She nodded, her trust in him absolute. I am not afraid. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Then, with a look of profound sorrow and love, he allowed his fangs to descend. They were like twin slivers of pearl, sharp and elegant. He met her eyes, a silent question, and she gave another slight nod. Consent. He bit into his own wrist first. Dark, ruby-red blood, almost black in the silvery light, welled up. He held his wrist over the basin, letting several drops fall into the water. They did not dissipate, but hung suspended like crimson stars in the reflection of the night sky. Then he took her hand. My love, he whispered, and gently he sank his fangs into the delicate skin of her wrist. The pain was sharp, a sting of ice and fire that made her gasp. But it was fleeting. It was replaced by a strange, dizzying euphoria as he drank. He took only a little, a symbolic taste, his eyes closing as if savoring the most precious wine. When he pulled back, he guided her wrist over the basin, allowing a few drops of her own bright, mortal blood to fall and mingle with his. The moment her blood touched his, the water in the basin began to glow with a soft, ethereal light. "Now," he murmured, his voice husky, "we drink of our shared life." He cupped his hands, lifting the glowing water to her lips. It was cool and tasted of ozone, of starlight, and of the faint metallic tang of their combined blood. She drank deeply. Then she did the same for him, lifting the water to his lips. He drank, his silver eyes never leaving hers. The moment the water settled within her, the transformation began. It started as a cold fire in her veins, racing through her body, a shock that made her cry out. Her own dormant magic, the old blood, rose up like a tidal wave to fight this immortal intrusion. The conservatory seemed to explode with light and power. The glowing flowers pulsed violently, and a wind whipped through the room, shattering the quiet. She felt as if she were being torn apart and remade atom by atom. Visions flooded her mind, the birth of stars, the cooling of the earth, the rise and fall of impossible cities under alien skies. She saw Valerius as a young man, walking in the sun, his eyes not yet filled with sorrow. She felt his pain, his loneliness, his millennia of grief, and his sudden, overwhelming love for her. At the same time, she felt her own power unfurling, a magnificent, vibrant force that had been coiled inside her for her entire life. The silvery mark on her face burned with a white-hot light, and she felt a connection snap into place. A connection to the stone of the castle, the roots of the mountain, the stars in the sky. Valerius held her fast, his arms a steel band around her, anchoring her to reality. He murmured to her in the ancient tongue of his people, words of love and reassurance, his strength a bulwark against the storm raging within her. He was taking the brunt of the chaotic energy, shielding her, guiding her. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. A profound peace settled over her. The cold fire in her veins became a steady, humming power. The chaotic visions coalesced into a clear, sharp, new perception of the world. She could feel the life in every plant around her, the slow, patient thoughts of the ancient stone beneath her feet. She could feel Valerius, not just his arms around her, but his mind, his soul, intertwined with hers. A bond, unbreakable and eternal. She opened her eyes. The conservatory was calm again. She looked at her hands. Her skin was paler with an almost luminous quality. She felt stronger, faster, more alive than she had ever felt as a mortal. She lifted her gaze to Valerius. He was watching her with breathless adoration. "Ilara," he breathed, his voice filled with awe. She reached up and touched his face. She could feel the life force thrumming within him now, a mirror of her own. She could feel his love, a vast and overwhelming symphony. And when she looked past him, into a pane of glass that acted as a mirror, she saw her own reflection. Her eyes, once the gray of a winter sky, now glowed with the same luminous molten silver as his. The transformation was complete. She was no longer just Ilara. She was his queen. In the aftermath, a new reality settled in. The immediate threat of Inquisitor Malachi and her father was gone, but not forgotten. They were a permanent enemy now, a symbol of the world outside that would never understand or accept what they were. But the fear was gone, replaced by a quiet certainty. They would face that threat, and any other, together. The blight on her former lands had already receded, as Valerius had promised. The village would prosper, ignorant of the true price that had been paid and the true reward that had been reaped. Her father would have his wealth, but he would live with the knowledge that the daughter he had discarded now held the power of a queen. It was a fitting, quiet justice. Their first act as a united couple was to walk to the high balcony as the faintest hint of dawn touched the horizon. In the past, this was the hour Valerius would have retreated to the castle's deepest shadows, away from the lethal touch of the sun. But now, something was different. "I can feel it," he murmured, standing beside her, his hand clasped firmly in hers. "Your magic, the life in your blood that is now mingled with mine, it shields me. The sun is not the instant poison it once was." As the first rays of morning light broke over the distant mountains, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, he did not flinch. He did not burn. He simply stood beside her, his silver eyes, so long accustomed to darkness, watching the sunrise for the first time in 1,000 years. A faint warmth touched his pale skin, and he closed his eyes, a look of sublime peace on his face. Ilara looked at him, her heart swelling with a love so vast it felt as big as the sky before them. She thought of the trembling, worthless girl who had walked into the Blackwood, expecting to be devoured by a monster. She looked down at her own hands, at the fine silk of her gown, and felt the steady, powerful thrum of immortal life within her. She had been sent as a sacrifice to save a dying land, but she had ended up saving a dying king, and in doing so, she had saved herself. What began as a punishment had become her salvation. The flaw that had defined her had become the source of her greatest power. The monster of legend had become the love of her eternal life. "It's a new day," she whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder. He turned his head and pressed a kiss to her temple, directly over the silvery mark that was now a badge of honor. "For us," he agreed, his voice filled with the promise of countless dawns to come. "It is the first of many." They stood together, king and queen, on the balcony of the onyx spire, no longer prisoners of the darkness, but rulers of their own twilight kingdom. Their pasts had been written, filled with loneliness and scorn, but their future was an unwritten book with infinite pages. They would face the challenges of the world, the hatred of men like Malachi, and the endless turning of the centuries. But they would face it all as one, united, equal. The story did not end here with the rising of the sun. It was only just beginning.